Words to know. Wobbly, to move unsteadily from side to side. Curious, eager to know or learn something. Scurried, move hurriedly with quick steps. Curious George Visits the Dentist by Margaret and H.A. Rees. Remember, the title tells us what our story is going to be about, and the author writes the words, and the illustrator draws the pictures. George was a good little monkey and always very curious. When he visited his neighbor, Mrs. Ross, he was especially curious about her gleaming basket of fruit. That bright red apple on top looked too perfect to be true. And it was. George bit into it and discovered that it was hard and sticky and not sweet. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Ross, "that's not a real apple, George. It's made of wax." By the time he went to bed that evening, George's tooth was less sore, but the next morning his tooth was wobbly. "We should see the dentist, George," the man said. The man explained that the dentist was a doctor for teeth, but George didn't want anyone to touch his tooth. What if it hurt? George walked along the path to the dentist's office with his friend, his steps getting slower and slower until he ran off to pick a daisy. "That's very pretty," said the man, chasing after George, "but we have an appointment and we shouldn't be late. You'll be a good little monkey, won't you?" The waiting room was a welcoming place. There were lots of things to see and do. George watched each child go through a red door, each holding onto a grown-up's hand. One frightened boy was carried by his mother. "George, you're next," the woman announced. George was sad to put down his book, but he was also a little curious about where the children were going. Was there a play area on the other side? The examining room was not filled with toys, but it was still interesting. George was curious. Why were there 2 faucets in the room? "Hello, George. I'm Dr. Wang. It's nice to see you," she said. "Why don't you lie down and we'll take a look at your tooth." "Friends, do you think he's going to wash his hands with the faucet that's by the chair?" "George, would you like me to try out the chair first?" the man asked. "Great idea," said Dr. Wang. The man lay down. "Open your mouth wide." The dentist shined the bright, big light down into the man's mouth. She took out a small white instrument to take a closer look. "This is a mouth mirror." George watched. It didn't look too scary. "Next, I'll count the teeth," Dr. Wang told George. She picked up one of those Sharpie pointy tools. "This one is an explorer. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the man exclaimed, "Ow!" "Uh-oh," the dentist said. George ran away. Friends, why do you think he ran away? He left the exam room and scurried down the hall. Scurry means he went quickly. There were many doors. He didn't know which was the way out. He tried one door and walked into another exam room. "A monkey!" a little girl cried and jumped off the exam chair in excitement as George backed out of the room. He continued down the hall, opening doors and disturbing patients. In one room, the little boy from the reception area was crying. George had an idea. He jumped onto the table and began juggling packs of dental floss. The little boy stopped crying and smiled. Next, George leaped onto the sink in the middle of the room. He pushed a button and nearby water jets spurted, spraying water around the room. George squirted water into his own mouth and into the boy's mouth too. The boy clapped, but Dr. Wang stood in the doorway. "George, you naughty monkey," Dr. Wang said. "What a mess you've made." Do you think he was being naughty or trying to help the little boy not be scared, friends? This monkey was the only one who could get Tyler to stop crying, the boy's mother said. Dr. Wang considered. She said, "It does look like we have some eager young patients, and if it weren't for George, I wouldn't have found the cavity in your friend's mouth. Turns out I need to have a filling," the man said. "Come on, George, let's both get our teeth checked." As soon as Dr. Wang looked into George's mouth, she laughed. "Why, George, all you have is a loose tooth. It's going to fall out soon. There's a new permanent tooth right behind it. Looks like you've been doing a good job brushing your teeth." George jumped on his chair. He did. He brushed every night and morning. George waved goodbye to his new friends. He went home with a new toothbrush, some dental floss, and instructions for his loose tooth. He decided he didn't mind going to the dentist at all. That night, he ate a healthy dinner with an apple for dessert. He put his tooth under his pillow. Why did he do that, friends? The next morning, George found a special coin in place of his tooth. And when Miss Roth came to check on George that afternoon, George proudly showed her his coin from the tooth fairy. She laughed and said, "Well, that's a quick way to lose a tooth, but I don't recommend it next time." George overcomes his fear of the dentist and learns about better dental hygiene with a little good-natured mayhem on the side.